You wake before the sun, not because you're a morning person, but because someone else decided you are. The chain around your ankle doesn't ask for consent. It just tugs, gently reminding you that you're not in charge. You sleep on a straw mat thinner than your last meal and filled with things that might be alive. You stretch, sort of, if your restraints let you. Your muscles ache, but honestly, you've stopped noticing. The pain's just part of the background now, like the barking dogs or the grumble in your stomach. Outside, the sky hasn't even considered getting pink, but you're already being yelled at by someone who doesn't even know your name. Or worse, does, and uses it wrong on purpose. You shuffle out into the dim light with the other slaves, forming a half-awake, barefoot parade of misery. You all know what's coming, but no one talks. Talking means punishment, and the overseer is in the kind of mood where he might invent a new one. You're in a latifundium, basically a Roman mega-farm, which sounds charming until you live in one. Think less Tuscany postcard, more agriculture-themed labor camp. Here, sunrise means quotas, and quotas mean you'd better move fast with that plow or someone else will move faster and get your meager supper. Historians still argue whether Roman slaves truly internalized obedience or just faked it really well. Spoiler, you're faking it. Most of your fellow slaves probably are too. You learn to nod, bow, and mumble the right things while daydreaming about your master slipping on grapeskins and falling into a well. And there's always someone worse off, like the poor guy chained in the ergastulum, a kind of underground prison for problematic slaves. It's dark, damp, and makes your sleeping arrangements feel like a luxury Airbnb in comparison. Fringe fact, some estates would even chain up slaves at night to prevent escape, creating a kind of haunted house vibe, but with fewer ghosts and more fleas. As you splash your face with freezing water from a communal basin, you wonder if today will be any different. It won't be. But hey, at least you've still got both hands. Not everyone's so lucky. The master's mood is your personal weather forecast. If he's happy, you get sun. If he's cranky, you're the lightning rod. And today, let's just say you hear the thunder in his footsteps. You stand in a quiet corner near the atrium, pretending to be invisible, which, ironically, is also your job description. Your eyes flick between the other house slaves. They're all doing the same thing, holding their breath, eyes lowered, desperately trying to read the morning like tea leaves. The master storms in, grumbling about something. A lost ring, a bad dream, a goat that looked at him funny, who knows. He kicks over a jug that probably wasn't even in his way and demands breakfast with the urgency of a man who's never heard of manners. Historians still argue whether Roman masters truly believed they were semi-divine, or if they just acted like toddlers with property. Judging by the way yours is yelling at the cook, it's both. And here's the thing, your daily fate could come down to how runny his egg yolks are. Too firm, someone's getting slapped. Too runny, someone's getting more slapped. You learn to watch his face like a weather vane. Twitchy eyebrow? Bad. Clicking tongue? Very bad. Sudden silence? Hide behind something solid. You glance at the mistress, perched on her lounge couch like a cat that owns the villa. She says nothing, but her eyes follow everything. You've seen her smile sweetly 1 second and order a whipping the next. There's power in silence, and high hairdos, apparently. Fringe fact, some elite Romans would consult household augurs, or pet birds, about what kind of day they'd have. Meanwhile, you're just trying not to sneeze too loud. The master finally finishes his meal, tosses the scraps on the floor like he's feeding the world's worst dog, and stomps off. You rush to clean up without making a sound, terrified that a clink of pottery might summon him back. Your hands tremble, but your face stays blank. That's part of the performance. And just like that, the weather clears. For now. But don't relax. You've seen it change on a dime. Sunshine to storm in less than a belch. You don't control the sky. You just serve under it. You're in the forum now, not as a shopper, but as the shelf. The slave market buzzes with the strange mix of boredom and panic that only humans in cages can produce. You stand on a raised platform under a sagging awning, the sun making sweat bead on your back before you even breathe. Your hands are bound, not tight enough to hurt, just enough to humiliate, and a chalkboard sign hangs around your neck. It lists your skills like you're a walking resume, minus the LinkedIn profile. A man pokes your arm, squints at your teeth, and sniffs. Yes, sniffs, your hair. It's not personal, it's just business. Historians still argue whether Roman buyers preferred Greek slaves for their supposed refinement, or just because it was trendy. Either way, you're not Greek, so your price tag isn't top shelf. One guy laughs at the sign on your chest. Can cook, it says. He jokes you probably cooked your last owner. That one always kills, or almost did. You're sold before noon, handed off like a scroll someone got bored reading. Your new owner wears a toga too clean to trust and a smile too small to be comforting. He tells you you're lucky. That's never a good sign. You're loaded into a cart with a few other fresh purchases. A boy who can sing, a girl who won't speak, and a man with one eye and a great sense of direction. Odd little family. Fun fact, well, more like horrifying footnote. Some slave traders would dye gray hairs black to make older slaves look young. You saw one woman's scalp dyed so fast, her skin turned blue. She still got sold. You pass shop stalls and temples on your way out of the forum. Rich people haggle over purple dye while someone literally negotiates your body. You wonder if anyone else notices the irony, or if that's just another luxury reserved for the freeborn. Eventually, your new master's villa looms. Marble steps, ivy-draped columns, and one extremely angry goose. You trudge inside, past a fountain shaped like Neptune, into your new life. New chains, new chores, same old story. But at least you're indoors now. The goose stays outside. Small blessings. Meals in your new villa come with less ceremony than you expected, and more disappointment. You had dreams, okay, delusions, of tasting the extravagant feasts the Romans are always bragging about. You know, dormice stuffed with almonds, honey-glazed hams, wine poured like water. Yeah, no, you get gruel. Not just any gruel. Cold, crusty, probably left out too long gruel, served in a cracked clay bowl with a generous garnish of "don't complain." You eat quickly, crouched in the corner of the kitchen like the world's saddest house pet. The cook, a snarky ex-gladiator with a limp and a fondness for yelling, tosses you a hunk of barley bread so dense it could double as a blunt weapon. You chew slowly, pretending it's olives. Your imagination is the only seasoning you're allowed. Historians still argue whether slave rations were actually calculated for sustainability or just minimum mutiny prevention. Either way, the math checks out. You're still upright, barely, and that's all the master cares about. You wash your meal down with watered-down vinegar wine, called posca. Imagine drinking sour sadness with a hint of foot. That's posca. Quirky detail? Olive oil, the Roman cure-all, gets used for everything. Cooking, cleaning, moisturizing, and yes, as an enema. You don't know that yet, but you will. Today you're just dipping stale bread into recycled oil from the master's dinner. Nothing says luxury like someone else's leftovers. And while the elite lounge around in reclining couches, debating poetry and vomiting between courses because moderation is for peasants, you huddle on a cold tile floor praying for a second helping. Spoiler, there isn't one. The mistress strolls past you mid-bite, commenting, not unkindly, on how well you're filling out. You're not sure if that's a compliment or a hint that you'll soon be sold to a family that likes their servants sturdy. Either way, you smile and nod with crumbs on your chin. You scrape your bowl clean, not because you're a neat freak, but because waste is a privilege. You look around the kitchen, pots bubbling for your betters, trays of figs and honey pastries just out of reach, like edible taunts. Then it's back to work. No nap, no chat. Just enough fuel in your belly to keep your legs moving and your dreams on a low simmer. You stand by the door, still as a statue, but with far less artistic value. In this villa, you're not really a person. You're a moving, breathing object, like a candle that can carry things and occasionally sob quietly in storage closets. When the master speaks, you don't answer, you respond. There's a difference. A response is obedient, crisp, and uncomfortably cheerful. An answer implies you're allowed an opinion. You polish the same bronze bowl 3 times because you can't remember if it was already shiny or if you just imagined that part. Your arms ache, but the rhythm helps keep the anxiety in check. That and quietly humming a song from your childhood, one with no lyrics and no known origin, just notes that survived the auction block. Historians still argue whether slaves in Roman homes formed secret support networks or just learned how to blend into the wallpaper. You're pretty sure it's both. You've exchanged enough silent glances to know who will share their crusts and who will report you for breathing wrong. And then there's your role. Not just a slave, but this kind of slave. Are you a housekeeper, a handmaiden, a human alarm clock? The answer is yes. to everything. You dust the atrium, serve wine, warm the bathwater, scrub the floor with the same rag they used to dry the dog, and light lamps without burning your own eyebrows off, most days. Quirky fact of the day? Some Roman households assigned slaves to specialize in whispering names of important guests during dinner parties. That's right, you could have been a professional name mumbler. Instead, you're just regular tired. The villa's youngest son calls for you with the imperious whine of someone who has never been told no. You trot over. He spills a cup of milk on purpose, just to see if you'll flinch. You don't. Internally, yes. Outwardly, you are a marble pillar of grace and inner screaming. You mop up the mess and mutter a prayer, not to Jupiter, but to whoever oversees spilled dairy and unfair lives. Then it's back to the hallway, back to invisibility, back to polishing the same bowl for the 4th time. You're not a person in this house. You're furniture. Slightly sarcastic, unusually tired furniture. You're scrubbing the floor near the peristyle garden when you hear them. The whispers, the shuffle of expensive sandals, the clink of a wine jug being opened far too early in the day, which, in Roman aristocracy, probably just means morning. The master is entertaining company, which means your day just got longer and riskier. You glide through the villa like a shadow with chores, never stopping, never speaking, absorbing everything. And what a lot there is to absorb. The master, who publicly praises duty and discipline, has been sneaking off with his wife's cousin. You know this because you accidentally walked in on them behind the bathhouse once. You now avoid that corridor like it owes you money. There are hushed debates about politics over spiced wine, always teetering just on the edge of treason. Historians still argue whether high-ranking Romans were genuinely concerned about republic versus empire ideology, or just like the drama. Honestly, from your view, it's mostly about who gets the best seat at dinner. One guest discusses a lucrative grain smuggling scam, unaware or uncaring that you're 2 feet away and actively memorizing every word in case you need leverage later. Blackmail? Oh, please. That's a noble's game. You just like knowing who's worse than you. It's a long list. The mistress is having an entirely separate crisis. Her prized lapdog has fleas, and she's blaming the new slave girl from Hispania. You know it's not her. You also know the fleas came from the lapdog's tiny jewel-encrusted bed that never gets cleaned. Quirky fact? Roman pet beds could be more luxurious than your entire living space. This one has a pillow embroidered with Felicitas in gold thread. You sleep on straw. Later, you're called in to pour wine during a dinner where nobody eats what they claim and everybody eats way too much of what they shouldn't. Someone drops a fig and you leap to grab it before the goose can. Yes. Does that? Goose again, somehow inside, looking smug. You eye each other like gladiators. One guest passes out snoring under a mural of Neptune smiting sea monsters. Another flirts aggressively with a statue. And all the while, you refill goblets, wipe up spills, and mentally file away gossip like a scandal librarian. You may not be allowed opinions, but you have secrets. And in this house, secrets are currency. The countryside smells like crushed herbs, manure, and despair. Welcome to life as a rural slave. You thought villa life was hard? Try spending your days under the open sky with zero shade and a shovel that weighs more than your dignity. Here, the only decor is rocks, and the only music is the rhythmic groan of overworked humans. You wake up before the rooster, because the rooster is lazy, and you're handed a pickaxe with the solemnity of a priest passing a sacrament. Your job today? Digging irrigation ditches. Again. And if you're lucky, you might get promoted to hauling water, which only sounds less miserable. Field slaves don't get polite nudges or chore lists. They get barked orders and the occasional shove from an overseer whose main qualification is angry. Historians still argue whether rural slaves were treated worse than urban ones, but let's be honest, no one's exactly thriving in a tunic and ankle shackles. You work alongside Gauls, Syrians, Nubians, people from everywhere Rome has waved a sword. You don't speak the same language, but you all understand the international dialect of groaning and hunger. That one's universal. One guy next to you, missing 2 fingers, jokes that he lost them in a gladiator brawl. You know he actually lost them to frostbite last winter, but hey, let the man have his legend. It's the only thing no one can confiscate. Fringe fact, some farms branded their slaves, like with hot irons. You've seen a few with letters seared onto their foreheads, usually abbreviations for fugitive. Makes your itchy tunic seem luxurious, doesn't it? Lunch is a hard lump of millet porridge, eaten while squatting on a stone that might also be a sacred boundary marker. One guy swears it curses your butt. You sit anyway. Then it's back to work. You haul, you sweat, you fantasize about thunderstorms just so you can stop moving. Evenings don't bring relief, they bring body aches, blister checks, and the dull, aching knowledge that tomorrow is identical. At night, you sleep in a shared wooden barracks with 50 others, shoulder to shoulder like sad sardines. It smells like labor and lost dreams. No marble fountains here, just dirt, cracked hands, and stars that don't care if you're watching. There's creative pain, and then there's Roman pain. The kind that comes with flair, a touch of theater, and enough variety to make a sadist proud. You've learned that punishment in the Empire isn't just about correction, it's also about spectacle. Sometimes it's a warning, sometimes it's just the Tuesday matinee. You're kneeling in the corner of the atrium, holding a bucket that's way too clean to be used for anything sanitary. It's your turn to watch someone else get punished. A reminder, they say, of what happens when one of you forgets your place. The unlucky victim, a stable boy who was caught napping beside the wrong horse. Not even on duty, just near a horse. The horror. Historians still argue whether punishment methods were consistent across regions or left entirely to a master's whim. Judging by what's about to happen, you'd bet heavily on whim. The overseer enters, carrying a whip that looks older than you, but twice as eager to work. And this one's mild, there's worse. Way worse. There's the wooden stocks, where you're left to stew in your own humiliation. There's the collar of shame, an iron ring with a sign announcing your offense. Think ancient mugshot meets wearable guilt. Quirky example, one collar found centuries later read, "Hold me so I don't run away." Honestly, could have used a better PR team. You've heard rumors of even darker fates. The ergastulum, that underground prison on some estates where bad behavior goes to disappear. Some never come back. Others emerge squinting and silent, like ghosts who forgot how to haunt. But today's punishment is public, brisk, and noisy. The stable boy doesn't scream at first. Then he does. The sound bounces off the marble and into your stomach. You stare at your bucket and imagine it's filled with soup, with wine, with literally anything else but your own helplessness. Later, you'll pretend you didn't hear it, pretend you're numb, but your fingers will twitch at the sound of leather forever. And you don't break rules, you don't forget chores. You live in a constant state of pre-punishment anxiety. Because in Rome, obedience isn't rewarded, it's expected. Silence is survival, and survival's all you've got. There are no locks on your door, because there is no door. Just a curtain, and not even a thick one. Privacy? That's not for you. Your body isn't exactly yours either. It's a resource, a tool, a perk for someone else's convenience. You're not always sure if a gentle touch means kindness or a warning shot. The mistress's new friend, a senator's cousin with far too many rings, has taken an interest. He leers like he's choosing a pastry. You're serving wine at the time, and your hand trembles just enough to spill a drop. His eyes sparkle. Yours do not. Later, he says you should be flattered. You smile because your other options are limited, and mostly involve crying into your tunic. Historians still argue whether Roman slaves had any autonomy over their sexual relationships. Short version? Not really. Long version? There were rules, but not for the people in charge. If your owner wanted you, you were available. If they didn't, they might sell you to someone who did. It's transactional, quiet, and gross. And yet, there are arrangements. One of the older kitchen maids has a sort of relationship with the baker down the street. Not officially, of course, but she visits him on her market errands and returns smelling like fresh bread and secrets. It's the closest thing to romance you've seen, and it's held together with whispers and risk. Fringe fact, some slaves were forced to work in elite Roman brothels known as lupanaria, which sounds fancy but really just means wolf house. Glamorous, right? Some were even tattooed with prices or warnings not to run. You look at your forearm and imagine ink there, then push the thought away. You lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to make peace with your own shape. Is it an asset? A curse? You tuck your arms in tight and breathe small. If they don't notice you, maybe they'll forget. But forgetting is rare. There's always someone watching, a glance too long, a compliment too slick. Even when nothing happens, something always happens. A boundary crossed, a comment dropped, a part of you stolen. You dream of being invisible, not the metaphorical kind you live every day, but truly, blissfully unseen. No stares, no touches, just stillness, safety. But the curtain shifts, the night goes on, and you keep pretending sleep. It always starts with a whisper. One slave leaning in just a little too close at the well, murmuring something about freedom, eyes darting like hummingbirds. You nod slowly, not because you agree, but because anything faster might look like enthusiasm, and enthusiasm is dangerous. By nightfall, the rumor's grown legs. Someone heard of an uprising in Capua. Someone else swears a friend of a friend joined Spartacus back in the day. Historians still argue whether these revolts were coordinated acts of resistance or just panicked bursts of collective desperation. You lean toward desperation. Rebellion isn't strategy, it's a heartbeat that refuses to stop. One guy, Brachus, starts giving speeches while cleaning chamber pots. You admire the multitasking. He talks about chains breaking, masters begging, slaves finally walking upright. His audience, a mix of believers and those just there for the imaginary drama. You stay silent. Not because you don't feel the rage, but because you do too much. Fringe detail. Some Roman estates kept spies among the slave ranks. Other slaves trained or bribed to report whispers like these. You have no idea who they are, but you suspect at least two, based on how they never blink and always nod at the wrong time. The air grows thick with paranoia. Brachus disappears 3 days later. Nobody talks about it. Official story is that he fell in the well. The unofficial story is that the well wasn't involved until after the falling. Either way, his mop still leans in the corner. No one touches it. You scrub harder that week, arms sore from fear more than labor. Everyone does. The master seems unusually chipper, like he can smell the crushed spirit in the air. The mistress orders extra wine. The goose gets meat scraps. Life goes on. You lie awake, tracing imaginary maps on the ceiling. What would you even do if you ran? Where would you go? The sea's far, the forests are full of wolves and bandits, and you're full of dreams with no exit route. Still, you hum Brachus' song under your breath, just the tune. Softly, no words. Words get you noticed. But in your head, the rebellion never died. The villa has gods tucked into every corner, some in marble, some in clay, some painted so poorly they look like startled vegetables. And you add to the chaos with prayers of your own, half-remembered chants from your mother's tongue, offerings of breadcrumbs to shadows, and whispered bargains made under your breath during particularly awful chores. Every Roman household has a lararium, a little shrine for household spirits. The family lights incense and offers wine. You sweep around it carefully, pretending you're invisible to the divine. But sometimes, when no one's looking, you sneak in a muttered plea for fewer fleas or less yelling. You figure the gods are used to multitasking. Historians still argue whether enslaved people were allowed to freely worship their native gods, or whether they were expected to convert and pretend Jupiter was their top guy. You've learned to keep your beliefs folded up inside you like a secret note, only taken out when you're alone. Today, the mistress burns bay leaves and mutters about an ill omen, a broken vase, a sneeze at the wrong time, a pigeon flying the wrong way. You nod solemnly while hiding the real reason the vase broke, you rushing to avoid the goose, obviously. She calls in a priest who does a lot of waving and almost no cleaning. Quirky fact, some Romans believed menstrual blood could ward off storms, curses, and crop failure. You once overheard a noblewoman smearing it on a grapevine. The grapes were fine. The neighbors were not. In the servants' quarters, one of the older slaves carves little symbols onto wood scraps. Personal gods, he says, from the hills of Dacia. He says one protected him from wolves. You're not sure it works on rich people, but hey, worth a shot. You keep a small stone under your mattress. It's smooth, useless, and sacred only to you. You touch it when you're scared, or tired, or pretending not to cry. It doesn't do much, but it's yours. At night, someone leaves crumbs at the base of the hearth for the lairs. You add a coin, bent and worthless, but it looks like an offering. Maybe one of the gods will see it and think you belong to someone else, someone kinder. You pray, not because it changes things, but because it's the only thing no one can take. You hear the word whispered like a spell, manumissio, freedom. It hangs in the air heavier than incense and more intoxicating than stolen wine. Someone in the villa just earned it. An older steward, gray-haired, slow-moving, but sharp-eyed. He's getting his liberty after decades of service, and the way the other slaves look at him, you'd think he just grew wings. The ceremony is short, a touch from a rod called a vindicta, a nod from a magistrate, and boom, you're free. Technically, the catch, you're still expected to act grateful, loyal, and available, like a retired employee who still has to show up for staff meetings. Historians still argue whether manumission was genuinely merciful or a clever way for masters to appear benevolent without giving up real power. You watch the newly freed man bow low and mutter praise to the master. He doesn't smile. Not really. His face is tired in that permanent way, like someone who's waited too long to enjoy anything. And now, everyone's whispering, "Could I be next?" The rules are foggy. Some slaves buy their freedom by saving coins over years, hidden in roof cracks or buried near olive trees. Some are freed in wills, because nothing says, "I appreciated you," like deathbed paperwork. Some just charm their way into it, becoming so essential that a master lets them go like a rich person donating to charity. Fringe fact, Romans sometimes freed their slaves and then married them. Scandalous? Maybe. Strategic? Absolutely. Imagine being both someone's property and their spouse. You can't decide if that's an upgrade or a new kind of prison. You fantasize about freedom constantly, not just walking out the door, but walking out with purpose. Maybe you'd sell perfume, or become a tutor, or finally sleep past dawn. You'd pick your own food, your own name, your own socks, if Rome ever invents them. But for now, you keep polishing the silver. The freed man nods to you in passing. You nod back. You try not to look too long. Hope is dangerous. It's fragile and loud and tends to attract attention. Still, later that night, you take a crumb of bread and hide it under the floorboard, your first savings deposit. A joke maybe, but every journey starts with a whisper and a crust. Children don't get to be children when they're born in chains. You watch a boy, maybe 6, carry a jug twice his size with the wobble of someone who still thinks the world is fair. His tunic is too long, his sandals are mismatched, and his eyes are already older than his face. They call him puer, the Latin word for boy, but it doesn't mean what it should. It means worker, asset, liability with dimples. There's no school, no recess, just chores scaled to size. He sweeps corners you can't reach, polishes spoons like they're silver suns, and carries messages between rooms because even rich people get lazy. The master calls him quick, and the mistress calls him useful. No one calls him a child. Historians still argue whether Roman slave children were given easier tasks out of pity, or simply because they broke too easily. Either way, they're still in it, just with smaller shovels. You once saw a toddler tugging on a senator's robe, thinking he was her father. Her real father was scrubbing latrines. The senator just laughed and gave her a coin, then took it back when she couldn't count to 5. That story still burns in your memory like spilled oil. Fringe fact, some Roman kids born into slavery were raised with their master's children, up to a point. They'd play together until age 6 or 7, then suddenly the roles kick in. You don't get to be a playmate and a servant. Pick one. Guess which they pick for you. The boy, his name's probably something like Felix, though no one remembers, cries only when he's sure no one's watching. You catch him once, curled in the pantry, holding a broken doll made from leftover cloth. He says it's his sister. You believe him. You give him half a fig from your dinner that night. It's not generous, it's guilt. You're lucky you're too old to be cute. Cute gets you noticed. And in a Roman villa, noticed is just another word for in danger. Still, you tie his sandals better before chores, and whisper warnings before bad days. You don't say much, but you hum a lullaby sometimes when no one else is around. Because someone should. You're not just a slave, you're a specialist now. Congratulations. One moment you're hauling amphorae, the next you're sorting wax tablets and balancing ledgers like a very polite accountant with shackles. It's a promotion of sorts, not freedom, but fancier chains. The master starts calling you by your skill, not your name. Bring me the scribe. Where's the cook? Tell the steward to stop coughing so loudly. You've become a job title with legs. It's weirdly flattering and deeply exhausting. Historians still argue whether skilled slaves were treated better or just exploited harder. You're leaning toward option 2, especially now that you're in charge of managing the storeroom, and everyone blames you when olives go missing. Yes, even the ones they eat. You now sleep in a slightly better corner, with a blanket that doesn't feel like it used to be part of a tent. You get to eat at the end of the kitchen queue instead of the middle. You're even allowed to speak directly to the master, provided it's about important things like linen budgets or goose feed. Fringe fact, some imperial slaves became so powerful, they essentially were the Roman bureaucracy. Guys like Narcissus and Pallas, freedmen who ran entire departments under emperors. You, meanwhile, run bath towel inventory. Start somewhere. You've learned tricks, how to flatter without groveling, how to disagree without being noticed, how to vanish in a room while still getting credit for showing up. You write beautiful lists in ink, and your handwriting is admired by people who don't know your real thoughts, because those stay locked behind your teeth. With status comes enemies. Other slaves eye your tasks like they're trophies. One even accidentally spills oil on your records. You spend a night redoing everything by lamplight, cursing softly into your stylus. But hey, at least it's indoor cursing now. There's a rumor that the master might free you in his will, or marry you off to a lesser relative, or promote you to overseer. You don't trust rumors, you trust routines, columns, counting jars, knowing that today's entry will match tomorrow's. You're a slave, yes, but a clever one, with enough tally marks to maybe someday write your own ending. And you sharpen your stylus just a little more carefully than usual. You walk past the family tomb and wonder, not for the first time, where you go when this ends. There's a row of marble statues, faces frozen in smug eternity, with names carved deep enough to last centuries. And then there's nothing. No spot for you. No plaque. Not even a bad poem. Death, like everything else in Rome, comes with a hierarchy. The elite get pyramids. You get forgotten. Historians still argue whether most slaves were buried in communal pits or simply cremated and scattered with no ritual. What they do agree on, memorials were rare, unless your master liked you, or pitied you, or felt guilty. One time, you heard about a freedwoman who spent her savings erecting a tomb for her former maid. That's the Roman equivalent of sainthood. You pass a grave marked "To Amicus," a good and faithful servant. You whisper thanks to someone else's master and keep walking. At least someone was remembered. Fringe detail, some slaves joined burial societies, groups that pooled funds so members could have a decent funeral, a nice urn, a real nameplate, maybe even a song. It's like a Costco membership for mortality. In your dreams, you picture a tiny stone with your name, maybe even a short line about your handwriting, or how you once saved the master's goose from choking on a date pit. The goose never thanked you. Rude. But today, there's no time for pondering. There's laundry. Always laundry. You haul linens past the garden, where the master's youngest stares at his reflection in a pool. You wonder if he ever thinks about dying. Probably not. People with statues rarely do. You steal a moment behind the tool shed, pull out your secret pebble, and set it gently beneath a tree root. Your own little ritual, your own hidden grave marker. Not for now, for later. Maybe someone will find it, maybe not. But you will know it's there. You breathe deep. The sky is clear. The goose is mercifully out of sight. And for a few quiet seconds, no one needs you. You live a life without legacy, but not without memory. And for now, memory is enough. Just don't drop the linens. That's how legacies really end. That morning smelled wrong. Not rotten or sulfurous, or like your neighbor's goat again, but wrong. You open your eyes before the sun fully commits to rising, and already something's off. The birds are too quiet. The wind carries a hint of smoke. Not the warm breakfast kind, but the something wooden and important is on fire kind. You sit up. You listen. Your gut drops. This isn't your usual bad oat harvest kind of day. This is the kind of day that becomes a story told in whispers by your grandkids, assuming you survive the next few hours. You sniff again. Smoke? Yes. But there's also salt. And tar. Which makes no sense because you don't live right on the coast. Your hut is one of the outer ones, near the grazing pastures. You peek outside. Fog clings low to the ground, strange for this time of year. But it's not fog. It's the kind of smoke that hugs things, thick and gray and oily. And then come the sounds. Not screaming, yet, but the sharp clank of metal, the kind no plow makes. Then voices, guttural and unfamiliar. Not local dialect, not even neighboring dialect. Viking. You grab what you can, which is basically nothing. A satchel with a crust of bread and that bone charm your aunt swore warded off curses. You consider your father's old axe, but decide it's more likely to get you killed than save you. Not everyone gets to be a saga hero. Outside, some villagers are still rubbing their eyes. Others have bolted already. Good for them. The ones standing around squinting toward the sound, less promising. A boy runs past you yelling, "They're here!" as if that helps anyone. One woman screams and rushes back into her house. Poor choice. That roof's not going to hold. And then, rising above it all, the distinctive thunder of boots hitting wet earth. Not marching. Vikings don't march. They flow. They swarm. And they're fast. You have seconds. You pick the slope that leads to the sheep pens. Not because it's smart, but because your legs are already moving. You tell yourself, this isn't real, even as your feet slap the mud. Historians still argue whether early warnings ever really worked during Viking raids, but your nose just outperformed every church bell. They don't row like fishermen. They row like executioners. Long ships slice through the shallows like bladed beasts, their dragon-proud heads sneering at the shore. You see them now, more clearly than you'd like, carved hulls gliding unnaturally fast, their oars sinking like the wings of a massive insect. The tide didn't even have time to disagree. You want to believe they'll just take the church silver and leave, maybe shout something unintelligible, wave a sword around, and be on their way. But these aren't just traders who got lost. These are raiders. And they have a to-do list. Men leap off the boats, knee-deep in surf. Leather, iron, fur, layers of movement that don't seem to slow them down. Axes slung like extensions of their own arms. Shields so round they look comically oversized, until you imagine them used to punch someone in the face. And that's before the spears. Always the spears. One of them throws a torch into a barn just to see how fast it burns. No one stops him. That barn was someone's livelihood. Now, it's kindling. You want to yell to stop this, but you also really enjoy breathing, so you keep your head down, your steps quiet. Here's a fun tidbit. Some Viking raiders blacken their faces with soot before a raid. Makes them look even more terrifying. As if tall, angry man shouting in Old Norse while swinging a double-headed axe wasn't already peak nightmare fuel. A horse breaks its tether and gallops past, eyes wide, nearly taking you out. You duck. A bit late. You get a face full of wet mane and indignity. But at least it masks your scent, or whatever dogs they brought might have sniffed. Silver lining. Historians still argue whether these raids were always so brutal, or if the reputation grew in the retelling. But standing here now, watching a man hurl a bucket of fire at a bakery, you're not inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. You duck behind a half-collapsed fence. From here, you can see the longships again. Some of the Vikings are laughing. Actually laughing. Not maniacal villainy, more like someone just told a joke involving chickens and monks. It's unsettling. They're not in a hurry, which is worse. This isn't panic, it's practice. They've done this before. You consider grabbing a pitchfork, then remember you're not in a heroic ballad, and your biceps are more mild soup stirring than valiant rebellion. So you do what your gut, and probably several ancestors, would suggest. You run. You're barefoot. Why? Because fate enjoys irony, and you were just stepping outside to relieve yourself when this all began. The ground is cold, gritty. You crunch over twigs, something squishy, and a beetle with thus unfortunate timing. Behind you, the raid crescendos, shouts, crashes, a scream that stops halfway. Your breath comes in bursts. You don't have a plan, only momentum. You veer left, then right, then left again. Mostly because you're dodging goats and chaos. Ahead is the barley field. Not a great hiding spot, but a good direction. Behind it, there's the old fence line that opens to the hill path. Fun fringe fact, some villagers in northern Europe used to train geese as early warning alarms. Yours? Completely silent, either terrified or just not paid enough for this nonsense. A shape darts across your vision. Too short for an adult, too fast for a wounded animal. A child? You can't help. Not now. Survival instinct drowns empathy in the moment. You keep running. One Viking spots you. You see the glint of his helmet through the smoke and sprint harder. There's a reason these men became legends. His legs eat up distance with terrifying ease. You spot a hay cart tipped over near the lane and vault it, awkwardly but effectively. He stumbles, curses in a language you don't understand but deeply feel. Historians still argue whether Viking raids targeted specific people or if the terror was more democratic. Right now, you are solidly on the anyone breathing list. You cut through old Tormund's orchard, scattering birds and apples. You don't stop to appreciate the craftsmanship of the hand-hewn fence you leap over. You do, however, stub your toe and add 3 new words to your private dictionary of agony. A shortcut opens on your right, the one you swore never to use because it runs too close to the bog. But shortcut means distance, and distance means life. You don't hesitate. You're no warrior. You're a blur of flailing limbs and very unmajestic noises. But you're still moving, and that, right now, is everything. The shortcut is a lie. It's not shorter, it's just weirder, narrower, smellier. It takes you through what can only be described as a glorified waste dump, though calling it glorified is generous. This was once the village midden. Old bones, cracked pottery, a spoon with suspicious fuzz, and something that might have been cheese in a past life. Now, it's your sanctuary. You clamber behind a slumped timber wall, half buried in refuse. It smells like boiled socks soaked in vinegar and sprinkled with regret, but it's dark and cool and sheltered, and exactly where nobody with functioning nostrils wants to look. You curl tight, trying not to breathe too loud. You hear voices, close, urgent. Heavy footsteps squish through wet loam, then silence, then sniffing. Please let that be a dog. No, wait. Not a dog. Quirky side note, some Viking warriors traveled with ravens, believing they guided them to battle or to food. Either way, not the company you want overhead right now. You flinch as wings flutter just above. A shadow zips past. One bird, then another. You're in a buffet tray, but so far, not the main course. A boot crunches down near your hiding place. Leather creaks. You press your tongue to the roof of your mouth to stop it from making any sound, because yes, even your saliva is panicking. Historians still argue whether hiding was seen as shameful during raids or just smart. From where you're curled, half submerged in onion peels and fish scales, smart sounds real good. The boot shifts, a grunt, then laughter. The kind that sounds disappointed. The footsteps retreat. Slowly, you count heartbeats. 50, 60, still breathing. Not skewered. You consider moving. Don't. Not yet. You make yourself smaller, pressing your back against what feels like a squashy turnip. You try to find gratitude for the awful smells. They're probably masking your own scent of fear sweat and sheer mortal panic. You're alive, hidden, safe, sort of, and covered in something you're choosing to call wet compost, because the alternatives are emotionally damaging. But you did it. For now. Your brain starts cataloging escape routes. None are great. One might involve crawling under a dead goat. You'll deal with that later. For now, you sit with the stink and silence, a gross little miracle of survival. Time stretches like old cheese, rubbery and slightly menacing. From your reeking hideaway, you listen. At first, it's chaos, the unmistakable crash of pottery, a scream that sounds like it belonged to your neighbor Gilda. You hope it wasn't. And the whoosh of something big catching fire. Again. But then, slowly, the village noise shifts. Not quieter exactly, just farther. The screaming becomes distant. The laughter of the raiders, once unnervingly close, now trails off toward the main hall and storage sheds. They're looting. Or celebrating. Possibly both. You inch forward and part a curtain of moldy straw. Through the warped slats of a nearby wall, you catch flashes of movement, shadows dancing in the firelight. A Viking walks past carrying 2 whole hams under one arm and a goat over his shoulder, like it's Tuesday and he's grocery shopping. Another stands guard at the crossroads, chewing something, possibly jerky, possibly someone else's jerky. Either way, he doesn't look thrilled to be on lookout duty. You shift your weight and instantly regret it. Something squelches beneath you, you choose not to look. You've made enough eye contact with horror today. Now comes the question. Stay hidden or flee farther? You're not safe yet. Just unseen. And unseen is a temporary status when Vikings are involved. Historians still argue whether these attacks were coordinated campaigns or just chaotic bursts of plundering opportunity. Judging by the trail of stolen livestock, broken fences, and a man trying to joust a pig with a torch, you're leaning chaotic. A shriek cuts the air, not of pain, but triumph. One of them found something shiny, probably the ceremonial goblet old Edbald always claimed was pure silver. Joke's on him, it was pewter. Hope they don't notice. You catch sight of movement in the tree line beyond the smoke. Someone else running, 2 people, maybe 3, survivors. You're not alone in your terror, which is oddly comforting in a misery loves terrified company sort of way. Fringe trivia. Some monks wrote about these raids years later, describing dragons from the sea. That wasn't metaphor. They were just very dramatic about longships. And honestly fair. You decide. You have to move. You wait until the lookout scratches something and turns to spit. That's your moment. You slip out of the midden, low and silent, hoping your scent trail is as confused as your nerves. You move like an animal, low, tense, twitchy. Every snapped twig feels like a cannon blast in your ears. But your body knows the land, even while your brain is currently a hamster wheel of panic. The raiders may be strong, fast, and terrifyingly well organized, but you've got the home field advantage, and feet that can tell moss from mud at a sprint. You duck into the tree line, weaving between familiar ash and oak. Your fingers trail across bark like it's a prayer. The path here bends sharply, then forks, left to the meadow, right to the stream. You take neither. You veer off the path entirely, down a half-eroded game trail only used by deer and the occasional incredibly lost goat. That goat once led to the worst birthday picnic of your life. Right now, that memory feels like comfort food. You pass the old sunken ring of stones where your cousin claimed fairies danced. More likely a forgotten charcoal pit. But hey, history and folklore are basically second cousins at a family reunion. The point is, the Vikings don't know this path. You do, and it's buying you precious minutes. A low whistle in the distance, then a different one in reply. You freeze. Signal calls, they're tracking. The Vikings don't just burn, they hunt. And some brought dogs. Great. Nothing like being a human squeaky toy in a bloodhound's dream. Quirky fact, Viking warhounds were real and often enormous, likely similar to modern mastiffs. Think oversized drool machine with murder paws. You picture one wearing a tiny hat and laugh silently, nearly choking on a leaf. Historians still argue whether local terrain knowledge gave villagers a reliable edge. Right now, your successful dodging of a concealed root snare suggests absolutely yes. You skirt a ridge, careful not to silhouette yourself against the skyline. Your feet move faster now, confidence creeping in, just a sliver. Then you smell water, the stream's near. If you can cross and follow it, the scent trail might break. Dogs hate water, or at least that's what you whisper to yourself while slipping down a mud bank face first. You land in a splash cold enough to reset your soul. It's messy, it's loud, but you're up fast and running again, soaked and laughing like a lunatic. You're alive, wet, and probably growing mold, but alive. Your feet squish through moss and mud as you follow what can barely be called a trail. It's more of a memory between trees. The underbrush thickens, thorny in places, damp in others. You duck under a fallen branch and find yourself standing at the start of a narrow, winding path edged by strange stones. They're stacked deliberately, like someone was bored and possessed by artistic mischief. A boundary marker? Or, as your gran used to say, a warning you're too stubborn to read. This, according to village gossip, is the monk's shortcut. Supposedly, centuries ago, a barefoot monk with wild eyes and questionable dental hygiene wandered into town, muttered something about voices and demons, and left behind this path. No one ever found out where he ended up. You know what the elders say. Follow it only if desperate, and never look back. You, meanwhile, are soaked, scratched, and being hunted by Viking lunatics with adorable but deadly dogs. Guess what? Desperate. The path curves like a drunk snake. You pass old stones etched with symbols that might be crosses, or just deeply confused squirrels. The forest seems to quiet around you, not peaceful, more like waiting. Your breath slows, trees grow thicker, older. A deep green hush settles, and for the first time in what feels like forever, you don't hear footsteps behind you, just your own heartbeat and a faint trickling from somewhere ahead. Here's a strange tidbit. Some paths like this were deliberately obscured by locals over generations, so only those raised nearby, or desperate enough to risk getting lost, would find and use them. An ancient GPS with a personality problem. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed in cursed roots, or if they just said that to scare off tourists. Either way, your skin is doing the thing where it tries to exit your body one goosebump at a time. Up ahead, nestled into the roots of a twisted tree, You see a low arch of stones, a shrine, or a landmark. You touch the edge, mossy, cold. A carved face looks back at you, worn by time but unmistakably grumpy. You nod respectfully. No sense tempting forest gods or disgruntled monks. The path continues, and so do you, glancing over your shoulder to spite yourself. You immediately regret it. A fox stares at you from behind. Just a fox, you think. Probably. Maybe. You walk faster, because, curse it or not, this weird monk trail might just be the only thing keeping you alive. The monk's shortcut dumps you eventually into the edge of a marsh, though edge might be generous. It's more like you gradually become one with the mud, slipping downhill until you're ankle-deep in squish, and the air smells like something died, got bored, and died again. You pause. The reeds here are tall enough to hide a small army, or a goose with attitude, which, historically, is more dangerous than you'd think. The water is murky, dark with tannins and secrets, and frogs. So many frogs. One croaks at you like it's judging your life choices. There's no clear path, no trail, just patches of clumpy earth that might hold your weight or might introduce you to the local leech community. You press on, each step a gamble, squish, suction, slurp. It's a symphony of discomfort. You spot a raised hummock ahead, solid ground, or so you hope. You slog toward it, arms out for balance like a drunken tightrope walker. Halfway there, your foot sinks into something deeper than expected. You freeze. A bubble rises, then another. You pull your leg free with a sound that could score a horror film. Fringe tidbit. Marshes were sometimes seen as spiritual borders. Neither land nor water, neither safe nor wild. Some believe spirits lingered here, whispering to those foolish or desperate enough to wade through. You listen. Just frogs, and something plopping ominously in the distance. You reach the mound, breath ragged. Sit. Your boots, assuming they're still technically boots, are caked with slime. You pick off a leech the size of a baby carrot and flick it, politely but firmly, into the reeds. Historians still argue whether early medieval folks used marshes as escape routes during invasions, or just as places to dump their garbage and regrets. You're making a strong case for escape route, even as your socks squish like drowned rodents. You drink from your satchel flask. It tastes like warm bark tea with hints of panic. Still, it helps. You spot movement again, far across the marsh. Someone else? Maybe. Maybe not. You lower your profile, just in case. The sun's dipping. The marsh turns gold for a moment, deceptively lovely. Then the mosquitoes arrive, in squads. You slap your neck. Another slaps your cheek. It's not elegant, but it's survival. You lie back in the reeds, just for a second, just to breathe. The earth hums beneath you as if saying, "You're still here. For now." A soft whistle pierces the marshy quiet. Not a bird, not quite human. Too clean, too practiced. You freeze mid-scratch. Mosquitoes don't care about dramatic timing. The sound repeats, followed by a gentle clink. Metal tapping wood. Someone's nearby. You shift, slowly. There, on a dry ridge above the reeds, a figure stands. Tallish, wrapped in a wool cloak, dyed a color that may have once been cheerful. He leans on a staff. Or maybe it's a shepherd's crook. You can't tell from here, but the pointy end's down, which feels promising. He hums, a familiar village tune, something half lullaby, half harvest ditty. The kind your aunt sang after 2 mugs of cider and a goat escaped the pen. The tune floats over the marsh like he's got nowhere better to be. Do you approach? He hasn't seen you, or pretends not to. Could be bait, could be a local, could be a Viking scout who's unnervingly good at regional folk music. You decide to move cautiously, upright, visible, a gamble on decency, which history doesn't always reward, but your options are limited and your ankles still smell like swamp. He sees you, nods, not alarmed, not aggressive. You get closer. His beard's streaked with gray, but his eyes flick with sharpness. He says nothing until you're 10 feet away. "The marsh spit you out, eh?" he asks, with the tone of someone who's said this exact thing before, probably to frogs. You nod. He gestures to a patch of dry moss. You sit. Your legs thank you with a series of bone pops that sound like a haunted xylophone. Quirky side note, shepherds in the Middle Ages were often hyper-local gossip hubs. They knew who was sick, who was secretly courting who, and exactly which path to take when people started yelling in Old Norse. He offers you a crust of bread, stale but legal tender in these parts. You nod toward the direction of the raid. He grunts. Pass through. Took grain, torched the smithy. He says it like one recites weather. Didn't get the mill, too stubborn. Historians still argue whether rural folk formed resistance networks or just hid and hoped. Judging by this guy's calm, you're betting on quiet competence. You ask if he's seen others. He gestures with his crook. Some ahead, some behind. You heading inland? You nod. He chooses bread. Then keep west. Stay low. Avoid the hollow trees. One bites. You blink. He doesn't elaborate. You thank him, unsure if you should bow or just leave. You choose the awkward half wave. He hums you off like a parent sending a child into a mildly cursed kindergarten. Night is not the comforting sort. It drops like a wet blanket that smells faintly of goat and disappointment. The sky above the trees is smudged with clouds, and the moon's doing a terrible job of lighting your way. You shuffle forward, aching and itchy, each step a quiet complaint from joints you didn't know existed. You're out of the marsh, technically, but still in the woods, dense, uneven, and filled with noises that all sound vaguely toothy. Somewhere in the dark, an owl hoots. You jump. The owl probably laughs. You find a dry enough tree with roots shaped like a sad armchair. You settle in, back against bark, and try to convince your body that sleep is possible while sitting up, damp and mildly vibrating from adrenaline. You curl your arms around your knees, more to preserve body heat than dignity. Because, let's be real, dignity checked out around the fourth leech. Your stomach growls with the melancholy of a bard who's forgotten the lyrics. You nibble what's left of the bread crust from earlier. It's less food and more suggestion of food. You imagine cheese. You imagine cheese wrapped in warm bread, dipped in stew, followed by a nap on a feather mattress. Then your imagination turns mean and conjures a whole roasted duck. You glare at a nearby squirrel, who glares back with the judgmental air of a landlord collecting rent. Fringe fact, some medieval folk believed that going too long without food or sleep would allow malevolent spirits to creep into your dreams and steal your strength. You're beginning to understand how that rumor got started. Historians still argue whether people slept in shifts during times of crisis or just collapsed whenever the shouting stopped. You're aiming for collapse with dignity, but the dignity part's not looking great. A branch snaps in the distance. You freeze. Listen. Wait. Nothing follows. It could have been a deer, or a rabbit, or someone whose sandals you are not emotionally prepared to meet. Eventually, your eyes droop. Your muscles go slack. Your body surrenders, slumping into the tree like a puppet cut from strings. You dream, sort of. Flashes of fire, faces, goats in helmets. You wake with a snort. Maybe it was yours, maybe it wasn't. Morning creeps in, pale and cold. You survived the night. That's the headline. The subhead is, you look like you fought a bramble bush and lost, but hey, alive. The sun's barely crested the trees when you spot it. A cart half sunken in the soft earth beside a gnarled birch. It leans like it gave up halfway through fleeing and decided to nap forever. The wheels are cracked. One side is splattered with something dark and flaky. Dried blood. Probably. Hopefully not recent. You creep closer. No movement, no growling, no ominous chanting, just silence, heavy and still. Then you see the body. Well, body might be premature. It groans. You freeze. The man lying beside the cart is wrapped in a torn cloak, stained with what might have once been fine embroidery. He blinks slowly at you like he's surprised the sky has opinions. A shallow cut across his temple has bled just enough to be dramatic. He mumbles something about chickens and bad maps, then passes out again. You crouch. You're not a healer, but he's breathing. That's something. Around him, the cart's contents are scattered. Broken crates, a smashed lantern, a satchel half buried in leaves. You risk a quick search. Inside, jackpot, dried apples, 2 chunks of hard cheese, and, miracle of miracles, a knife. It's dull, but it's steel, and it's yours now. You take what you can. You hesitate. Then you drape part of your cloak over the man's shoulders. Kindness or guilt, or maybe both. Fringe trivia. Some travelers carried tiny vials of vinegar on cords to sniff against plague, bad air, or just unpleasant company. You're considering filling one with whatever's in this cheese just to stay awake. Historians still argue whether medieval roads were safer during invasions or more like roaming danger parties with extra splinters, judging by this cart's fate, the latter is winning. You chew some apple, carefully. Your jaw clicks like a church bell, but it's food. The sugar hits your bloodstream like a sermon from heaven. You suddenly remember what hope tastes like, and it's mildly dusty fruit. The man stirs again, mutters, "Don't trust the goat," and lapses back into unconsciousness. Noted. You grab a strap from the cart and fashion a makeshift sling for your satchel. The knife slips in nicely beside the cheese. Somehow, this sad wreck of a roadside moment has upgraded your gear and mood. You nod once to the man, unsure if he'll ever wake up. You hope so. But you've got to keep moving. This place is too open, too still, too full of yesterday's bad endings. By late morning, the forest feels different, less haunted, more negotiable. Trees thin, sunlight spills in patches, and the underbrush gives way to something like a path again. You're cautious but faster now. Your stomach's quiet, thanks, sad apple, and the knife on your hip gives you just enough confidence to consider bluffing a squirrel. Then you see it. Smoke. Not thick and ugly like the raid's fire, but pale and curling, like someone cooking or being slightly careless with a hearth. You pause. Could be danger, could be breakfast. You approach low, flanking through thickets like you've done this before. You haven't. You spot a cottage, small, sagging, roof-patched with moss and what might be animal pelts. In front of it, a woman stirs a pot over a tripod fire. She's old, older than bark. Her back's hunched, her hands are fast, and her eyes flick toward you before you even make a sound. "Lost," she says, like it's the start of a joke. You nod, hesitant. She motions you closer with the ladle. You obey because either she's harmless or she'll hex your tongue into a frog, and frankly, either way, you'd like a hot meal first. The stew smells intriguing. Root vegetables, maybe turnip, maybe sock, but it's hot, and your insides perk up like hungry puppies. She ladles some into a cracked bowl and hands it over. "You look like something the marsh coughed up," she says, with the same tone someone uses to mention it might rain later. Fringe detail. In isolated regions, older women often served as healers, herbalists, and rumor collectors. Part medicine, part myth, part human newspaper. You've found one. Possibly more sass wizard than witch, but you're not betting either way. You eat, carefully. It tastes like someone boiled anxiety and added salt, but your body's thrilled. She watches you like a hawk disguised as a grandmother. "You come from the coast?" You nod. She snorts. "Figures. Saw smoke. They'll want the grain stores inland next." You tell her what you saw. The boats, the men, the ridiculous goat incident. Her eyebrows rise, but she doesn't interrupt. When you finish, she nods once. "You can stay here till sunset," she says. In exchange, you tell me everything again, slowly. Historians still argue whether peasants willingly aided refugees or just tolerated them. Right now, this feels like a bargain. You agree. She grins like a toad who just won a bet. You sip your second bowl of stew, heart warm, knife tucked, mind turning. The world's still dangerous, but this moment isn't. You leave the cottage with the weight of stew in your belly and a sprig of something herbal tucked into your collar. The old woman said it was for luck, or at least fresher breath, and cackled like she knew something the gods didn't. You thanked her twice and promised to walk wide of hollow trees. She gave you a wink that could peel bark. The woods now feel familiar, if not friendly. You follow her directions west, staying off the main paths and listening to the breeze like it owes you a warning. You don't get far. A sound, quick and sharp, rips through the air. A whistle, not bird-like, not musical. The shepherd's tone again, but different. You drop instantly, stomach cold. Voices follow, foreign, controlled, too calm, a scouting party. You belly crawl behind a fallen log, pressing into the leaf litter. Two men in piecemeal armor stroll into view. Their boots are clean, their beards trimmed. Raiders, yes, but methodical, professional. One carries a spear like it's part of his skeleton. The other, blonde, broad, and casually terrifying, swings a small axe against his thigh in a rhythm that suggests boredom, not nerves. You hold your breath. They stop. Look around. That's footprints, one says in a language you only barely recognize. You've picked up a word or two, just enough to know that's never a good one. They kneel near a patch of disturbed moss. Your moss? You cursed it earlier for being lumpy. Now it's about to rat you out. Fringe detail. Some Norse warriors trained in tracking and silent movement, basically the medieval version of special ops. They weren't just berserkers, some were patient, too patient. Historians still argue whether Viking scouts traveled in pairs or in small units. But right now, you're dealing with a duo who clearly skipped the burn everything lecture and signed up for chase muddy peasants with creepy efficiency. You reach slowly into your satchel, fingers wrap around the dull knife. Not much, but better than teeth. Unless your teeth are legendary, which yours are not. One scout stands, points toward the stream. The other nods. They move off, soundless as shadows, in the opposite direction. You don't move, not for a full minute. 2. Then you exhale, long and shaky. The knife goes back. You slide from the log and head up a slope, away from their path. Faster now, smarter now. You weren't caught, but you were hunted, and that changes how you walk from here. You find them just before dusk. Travelers, refugees, call them what you like. A dozen people, maybe more, trudging uphill with that same wild-eyed shuffle you've grown used to, seeing reflected in puddles. They don't look at you like a stranger. They look at you like another thread in the same unraveling tapestry. You slip in behind them, wordlessly. No one asks where you came from. No one asks where you're going. That's not how things work right now. A boy glances at your satchel. You pass him the last bit of apple without a word. He nods like that cost you more than it did. In truth, you're not hungry anymore. Not for food. Not for solitude either. The group is quiet. A woman with gray streaks in her braids walks near the front. She holds a carved staff, not fancy but well used. You catch her eye. She nods once, then goes back to scanning the trees. A look that says, we've all lost something. Don't make us lose more. You notice how they move, not fast, but clever. They avoid open trails, circle wide around ravines, even pause to listen every so often. A rhythm emerges. Step, pause, listen. Not panic. Precision. This isn't fleeing, this is migrating under pressure. Quirky side fact. In some raids, survivors reportedly disguise themselves as traveling pilgrims or traders, slipping through regions pretending to be on religious journeys. You tighten your cloak, adjust your stride. You're not a villager anymore. You're a pilgrim now, a very muddy, slightly cheese-scented pilgrim. Historians still argue whether regional communities open their gates to these disguised groups or turn them away out of fear. But this group moves like it's seen both answers, and survived anyway. A teen girl offers you a cloth, old, patched, but dry. You use it to wipe your face. She offers a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Trauma makes quick friendships. Later, the group pauses to rest near a hollow tree. You flinch. The staff woman chuckles. Not that one, she says. The biting one's east of here. You almost laugh. Almost. You sit beside them, no longer alone, not entirely safe, but not helpless either. You're part of something now. Temporary or not, it matters. When you rise again, your steps match theirs. Purpose replaces panic. The rhythm of survival becomes the rhythm of escape. You keep moving inland, together. It takes weeks. Days blur together into muddy boots, cold mornings, and the quiet math of rationing crumbs. Your little group bends and stretches as people join, leave, or simply vanish. Some find family, others find purpose. You find, well, a sort of rhythm. You get used to walking before sunrise and sleeping with one eye open. Survival stops being thrilling. It just becomes your job. Then, one late afternoon, you reach it. The high road east. Paved with ancient stones and edged by thorny hedges, it cuts across the hills like a spine. From here, trade routes reach deeper inland towards safer towns, fortified ones with walls. The caravan leader, a merchant who smells like cloves and mild regret, waves your group over. You folk from the coast? He asks, already knowing. Someone nods. He sighs. You're lucky. A few days ago, we passed a village that was just smoke and crows. No one replies. You've all heard versions of that story. Some of you have lived it. You trade what you can, bits of cloth, a copper brooch, a story or two, in exchange for space in the caravan. It's crowded, but it moves. And moving is surviving. Fringe fact, survivors of Viking raids sometimes blended into new communities by claiming saintly visions, distant cousins, or miraculous escapes. You're leaning toward the quiet laborer who doesn't ask for much angle. Historians still argue whether those who fled ever truly stopped running, if peace found them, or if they just got better at pretending it had. You pass a chapel one morning, small and soot-kissed. The priest blesses each traveler without asking names. You pause. Let the cold water touch your forehead. You don't believe in miracles, but maybe, just maybe, you believe in clean starts. You reach the town 2 days later. Walls, gates, guards with actual uniforms. People trade copper and grain without glancing over their shoulders. You step through, and no one stops you. You're just another face in a crowd that's seen too much. Inside, you're given a blanket, a bowl of something hearty, and a place to sleep. Not a home yet, but shelter, warmth, rest. You lie down on straw that smells of livestock and lavender. It's glorious. The ceiling doesn't flicker with firelight. The only sound is snoring. You made it. You're not who you were. You've lost things, people, pieces of yourself. But you're here. And tomorrow, you start again.